Section 6.4, the slope of a line. Have you ever gone skiing? Some ski slopes are very steep, while others are more gradual. In math, when talking about the slope of a line, we are talking about how steep that line is and whether the line is going up as you move from left to right or if it is going down as you move from left to right. In this section, we will explore how to give a numerical value to how steep a line is in math. On the grid pictured here, you can see that I have put 2 points. And I'm going to draw a line between those 2 points. I'm going to try and draw it as straight as I possibly can so that we can examine and determine what the slope is of that line. Remember, the slope is how steep that particular line is. And when I take a look at this, slope is determined by figuring out the change in y over the change in x. So I'm going to put down here change in y over the change in x. So if I want to find out what the change in y is compared to the change in x, I need to start at one point. I'm going to start at the bottom point. I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have to go up 5, and I have to go over 2. So the slope of this line would be 5 over 2, or more commonly known as 5/2. You can see that when I started at the bottom point, right here, I went up 5. So it's a positive 5. When I went to the right over 2, that's a positive 2. So this is a positive 5 over a positive 2, so it does have a slope, as we said, of 5/2. But when you go through and you find the slope, it doesn't matter what point you start with along that line and which point you go to. For instance, let's say I wanted to start with the top point. If I start at the top point and I want to go to the bottom one, I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to go down 5. So my change in y is a negative 5. When I go to the left, I am going a negative 2. So in this case, my slope is a negative 5 divided by a negative 2. But remember, a negative divided by a negative is equal to a positive. So my slope is still 5 over 2, or 5/2. It doesn't matter from which point you go to the other point. You can go either way. Let's take a look at another example. You can see I've drawn another line, and I'm going to find the slope. Slope is the change in y over the change in x. So from one point, I need to go down 1 on the y, and then I need to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the x. Notice when I went down 1, that's a negative 1. When I went to the right 5, that's a positive 5. So the slope of this line is a negative 1 over a positive 5. It is a slope of negative 1/5. So let's take a look at one more that I've just drawn in the fourth quadrant. You can see that in order to get from one point to another point, in this case I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is a positive 4. I'm going to go to the right 1. So that is a positive 1. So the slope of that line is a positive 4 over a positive 1. It's a positive divided by positive, so it is a positive slope, and 4 divided by 1 is just equal to 4. So that particular line, I would say, just has a slope of 4. One other idea to take note of before we move on is to notice that one of these lines is a negative sloped line and the other one is a positive sloped line. This line right here is a negative slope line, and notice that as we look at it, it goes down as you look at it from left to right. If you are looking at a line that goes down as you look at it from left to right, it is always going to be a negative sloped line. The other line is a positive sloped line. As you are looking at it from left to right, it is going up. So we have a positive sloped line. And that is always true when you have negative slopes, positive slopes. Negative slope lines, as you look at them from left to right, go down. Positive slope lines, as you look at them from left to right, go up. I've drawn two different lines on this grid, the black line and the red line. And what I like you to do is I like you to pause this. I like you to figure out the slopes, then turn it back on again, and you can watch me as I go through figuring out the slopes as well. Okay, I hope you've had a chance to go through and figure out the slopes. I'm going to figure out the slope of the black line first. In order to figure out that slope, I am going to start at the bottom point, and I am just going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is the change in y is plus 4. The change in x is a plus 2. So that slope is a positive 4 over a positive 2, or that just has a slope of 2. Before I continue, remember a slope of 2 means 2 over 1. And notice that this black line also goes through that particular point, which means that if I had wanted to, I could have gone from the bottom point up 2 over 1 to that particular point. It's the same slope, because I can choose any point on that line. I don't necessarily have to go to the top point if I can see another point that is on a grid that makes sense. Let's take a look at the bottom one. As far as the bottom, the red line goes, if I wanted to determine the slope of that, I'm going to start at the top one. I am going to go down 2 because it's the change in y. So it is a negative 2. And then I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to go over 7 to the right. So that is a positive 7. This is a positive 7 movement. So that one has a slope of negative 2/7. Before moving on to another idea, let's talk about the slope of horizontal and vertical lines. You can see I have drawn a red horizontal line. And remember that slope is the change in y over the change in x. So if I want to go from this point to this point, my change in y is nothing. I don't go up or down at all. So that change is a 0. And my change in x, I'm going to move over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 0 over 5. Well, 0 divided by 5 is just equal to 0. 0 divided by anything is equal to 0. So, in this particular case, I just have a slope of 0. All horizontal lines have a slope of 0. So let's talk about the blue vertical line that I've drawn. We're going to go through the same process. If we start at one point and go up to the next point, the change in y in this case is 1, 2, 3. So the change in y is 3. The change in x, though, we don't move at all along the x, so its change is 0. So I have 3 divided by 0. Well, it's not possible to divide by 0. Anytime you divide by 0, we say it's not possible, or the mathematical term is it is undefined. So, anytime at all that you have a vertical line, we always say that its slope is undefined. It's not possible to have that slope. Sometimes in this section, you might be asked to determine the slope between 2 points, but you won't be able to see a graph while you're doing it. Now, I have a graph here just to show you what exactly we're talking about, but let's pretend for a moment that that graph, that grid is not there. Let's say we wanted to find the slope between the points 3, 1 and 5, 4. Well, remember that the slope is the change in y over the change in x. So that means that I need to find the change in my y points as compared to the change in my x points. So as I go through and do that, my y points are right here, a 4 and a 1. Change means subtract. So I'm going to subtract those. 4 subtract 1 is my change in y. My x points are the 5 and the 3. So I'm going to subtract 5 minus 3. And then if I wanted to determine the slope, I would just subtract these. 4 subtract 1 is equal to 3. 5 minus 3 is equal to 2. So this has a slope of 3/2. If you did look at this on a graph, on a grid, notice that to get from the red point, I would go up 3, the change in y. I would go over 2, the change in x. So I would have that slope of 3/2. But you can also do it just algebraically or mathematically, I guess I should say, by subtracting the change in y over the change in x. Let's figure out the slope without looking at a grid. So the slope is the change in y over the change in x. And you are going to see when you look at the book that it oftentimes gives a little formula. It is said y of 2 minus y of 1 over x of 2 minus x of 1. Now that looks a little confusing, but it really is not. As I go through, this is my first set of points. It's x and y. So I'm going to say this is my x of 1, this is my y of 1. This is also another xy pair, but I'm going to say this is x of 2, this is y of 2. So now really what I'm doing is I'm going through and I am subtracting first of all my y of 2 minus my y of 1. So I get 3 subtract negative 1 over, then I'm going to do my x of 2, 2 minus negative 3. 2 subtract negative 3. Now when I go through and I do the math, 3 subtract negative 1 means I'm going to add both of these. I'm going to get a positive 4. 2 subtract negative 3, once again I'm going to add both of these. So the slope that I am going to have is 4/5. Here are two more examples of just determining slope, both without looking at a grid. Once again, you might want to turn it off and try and do it yourself, and then come back and turn this back on again. Okay, hopefully you have been able to go through and figure out the slopes. Let me go through and do these also. For the top ones, negative 2, 4, and 3, 1. I am first of all going to subtract my y's. So I have a 1 and I have a 4. So I'm going to have 1 subtract 4 on the top. Then I'm going to subtract my x's. I have 3 subtract negative 2. 3 subtract negative 2 on the bottom. When I go through and do the math, 1 subtract 4 gives me a negative 3. 3 subtract negative 2, I'm going to add both of those together. I'm going to get a 5. So the slope for this is a negative 3/5. On the bottom, I'm going to go through and do the same thing. First of all, I'm going to subtract my y's. So I get 8 subtract 8. On the bottom, I'm going to subtract my x's. 6 subtract a negative 2. On the top, 8 subtract 8 is equal to 0. The bottom, once again, I could add. I would get 0 over 8. So the answer to this is 0, because 0 divided by anything is equal to 8. So that would have a slope of 0. One word of caution when going through and determining slope this particular way. I have the 2 points here, 3, 4, 7, 10. So I'm going to go through first of all, and I'm going to subtract my y's. Notice I'm going to start with the 10, and then I'm going to subtract the 4. So in that particular case, I get 6. When I go through and subtract the x's, since I started with the 10 here, I have to start with the 7. I have to start with the x term in the same coordinate pair, the 7. So I have to have 7 subtract 3. I can't have 3 subtract 7. That would not work because I'm not choosing the same x term from the same y term that I chose. So it's really important that you go through and you choose both the x and the y, the first ones that you choose from the same coordinate pair as you go through. If I do continue this the correct way, 7 minus 3 is equal to 4. This has a slope of 6 over 4, which, by the way, if I wanted to, I could say is the same thing as 3 over 2. And either one of those answers would be acceptable. Finding the slope of a line, either by using a grid or just by knowing 2 points on the line, is a very important idea in the next section we will be talking about, which is graphing lines using the slope-intercept formula. If you have any questions about anything you have seen in this video, please do not hesitate to ask.